Good evening, everybody. We are here and we are back with Reasoned Live. Darren is sadly dying of the plague, so cannot join us this evening, but I figured we'd better get back to our viewers because we have missed a couple of live streams over the Christmas and New Year period, and we're missing you guys very, very much. We're missing all your comments. We love tuning in, talking to you guys on a Wednesday evening, so we're back and we've got Connie with us for the first time. Connie has been exiled from university for thinking there are only two genders, to sum up who Connie is. And she's still fighting on, troopering on, not letting the wokies shut her up. So she will be joining us for this evening. Obviously, grooming gangs is first and foremost what we're going to be talking about this evening. We've got some other stuff going on. Sadiq Khan is getting into trouble with the adverts he's been putting on the tube. Mark Zuckerberg is bringing free speech back to Facebook and Instagram. Finally, we'll be talking about that as well. But let's start off by talking about what has just gone on this evening. So around 7 o'clock, we had the vote take place on the Tories' so-called wrecking amendment to the Children's Wellbeing Bill. And this was, if we go back down to the figures here, we had 111, if they keep changing this on Sky News. Don't know exactly where it is, but you had 111 MPs voting for the supposed wrecking amendment. Now, it is quite a confusing situation, and we'll try and best explain it to you in that the MPs that voted against this amendment, a lot of them will have been doing so just because they did not want to get rid of the whole of the Children's Wellbeing Bill. So this included various things about free school meals, children being able to afford their school clothes, changes to the school curriculum, things about children's safety as well. So after the very sad death of that little girl, Sarah Sharif, who was, essentially beaten to death by her parents, making sure, in her case, her parents were allowed to take her out of school, homeschool her and whatnot, making sure that those slip-ups don't happen again, putting in various safeguards in place. And the reason why this got called by the Labour Party a wrecking amendment is because the Tories added in this amendment asking for a national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. If people voted for that amendment, it would essentially detopple the rest of the entire bill. So that is perhaps one of the reasons why MPs voted against it. Keir Starmer putting his MPs in quite a difficult position by putting in place a 3-line whip on this vote as well. So essentially saying, if you do not support the government, if you vote for the Tories' amendment, you will be kicked out of the Labour Party. You will then become a Labour MP. So anyone who wanted to support that amendment for a national inquiry, who is a Labour MP, would have faced pretty dire consequences for their career. Alex, let's go to you first. What are your thoughts on the vote that's just taken place this evening?
I mean, Chloe, I'm utterly dismayed at the entire day today, not just the vote, but the debate in Parliament during PMQs as well. It seems that our political class have just completely failed, not just us, but time and time again, they're failing, children and victims of this absolute scandal. And
I just realised you could see my WhatsApp.
I was just checking if the screen was blurry for everyone else. But
right, hopefully nobody saw anything.
What it is, Chloe, is that Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips and the Labour Party in general have got an agenda. There is so much more going on here, despite the facts being given to them that there are up to 50 towns. They still won't call a national inquiry to join the dots together to hold those people who escaped being held accountable for their crimes. Those people in positions of authority like the police, the CPS, loads of them got away with it. It is shocking to me that anyone in their conscience can vote against a bill like this. That is 300 or so Labour MPs whose names are going to go down in history as voting to deny justice for victims of child rape and torture. That is going to be their legacy. I really hope they realise what they've done and how unforgivable this is going to be, and it's not going to go away.
Connie, now we had Keir Starmer come out yesterday and accuse people calling for a public inquiry of jumping on a far-right bandwagon. What did you think of those comments?
I genuinely couldn't believe that was the route that he went down. Like, there were rumours that people were saying, people online were saying this is just a far-right thing, or conspiracy, or a far-right bandwagon to jump on. But I genuinely could not believe that was the route that he went down for that press conference. And I'm so interested to know what his advisors are telling him, because they go on about wanting to not stoke up division, but it's like he's asking for people to take to the streets because people are so outraged by it. But then on the other hand, and something that I've been wondering about is, because we're active on X, how much do ordinary people actually know about this? Because the mainstream media, they're not able to even say the things out loud that we're reading all the time on X. So I don't think the majority of the public have any idea about what actually happened. Because when I saw Charlie's report, genuinely, I had no idea how bad the whole thing was. My mum used to tell me, oh yeah, this grooming gang scandal was really bad in some cities. I knew it was bad, but I had no idea how bad. And I think that's the point. Keir Starmer saying, oh, none of you lot cared about this before. No one knew how bad it was before. Before Charlie's report, no one knew how bad it was. So forgive us for not making as big of a song and dance about it as we are now. I mean, the question is, why do they not care more after hearing how bad it was? Like, why is the question being pointed to people who are suddenly caring about it, for whatever reason? Why are they not caring about it more? And I think the way that the questions are being asked from both sides is it's so sinister. Like the way that Bridget Phillipson posted this morning saying, I couldn't believe that the Tories would stoop this low to vote against protecting children. I mean, I don't have words for it.
It was just I would like to come back on that, but it was specifically. I do have perhaps maybe a little bit more sympathy than Alex had there for the people that did not vote for the amendment, because it meant the toppling of this whole other bill on children's well-being, which had a lot of good stuff in it. We had I saw Kwasi Kwarteng was talking on GB News to Chris Hope earlier, and he was explaining what probably would have been a more appropriate intervention is to organise what's called an opposition day, where the opposition have the opportunity to bring forward things and vote on them. It's not binding, but it wouldn't have put MPs in such an awkward position. Also, so I just want to show you this was the article that Miriam Cates wrote earlier, sort of explaining the situation, because it's quite complicated with the different stages of the bill, how it works. So she was saying, these kind of add-on amendments where you're just adding to something rather than it wrecking the whole bill, that happens at a later stage. That happens at the committee stage and report stage of the bill, which comes later, as opposed to the second reading, which we have done today, which Miriam says is simply a binary decision as to whether MPs agree that the piece of legislation should continue through Parliament or whether it should be thrown out altogether. So if the MPs did not support the government today, that whole bill would have been thrown out altogether. Now, that maybe means that at the later stages, the committee stages, there is the opportunity to try and push for another amendment on this. I mean, I doubt that will happen. I think the Conservatives probably wanted to strike whilst the iron was hot and whilst this was in the news, rather than wait weeks and months for it to get to later stages. So that's maybe why that they made that intervention today. But Miriam says here, Labour MPs therefore faced an enormously difficult decision if they voted for the amendment, because they agree a national inquiry is needed, they will also be voting to sabotage a key piece of government legislation. So quite a difficult position for MPs to be in today. Ultimately, I think if the Labour Party is going to bring forward a national inquiry, well, they've got to do it themselves. It's going to be quite hard for the Conservatives to force it upon them. But just going back to what Connie was saying about, what on earth is Keir Starmer being told by his advisors? What is going through their head? I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, Alex. Does Keir Starmer genuinely believe that the ICSA report that was done previously, does he genuinely think that it is sufficient and the best thing they can do for victims is to implement the recommendations in that report? Or do you think that he knows that it's not appropriate, but he wants to cover the reputation of the Labour Party and potentially of himself, and so he's just using this as a cover? What do you think, Alex?
Well, it's pretty clear from Jess Phillips's remarks today, before we even got to the debate in Parliament, PMQs at least, that she said she would support a national inquiry if the grooming gang victims said so. Well,
there was a bit of a change of tone there, which I think is quite important to note, because at first it seemed like they were completely ruling it out, and then it sort of changed to, we'll listen to what the victims want.
Yeah, but the interesting thing there, Chloe, is that she hasn't actually spoken to Telford victims yet. And, it's very, very rich for someone like Jess Phillips to go on BBC. She had the time to prepare for an interview and go to BBC studios, but she hasn't got the time to call victims that she is meant to be safeguarding. I think that should tell the audience everything they need to know about Labour's intentions to broaden the scope of that bill to cover all of those extra towns and cities and actually hold people accountable. Yes, the bill today will do some good, and I applaud any move to make children safer in our very dangerous country, but it doesn't go far enough. That's the point. It doesn't actually tackle the root cause of the grooming gangs. It doesn't have provisions to hold people in power accountable. And the British public don't want to see more flag waving saying we've done something. I mean, Keir Starmer's reforms of the CPS that he heralds them as some sort of saviour. He makes himself out to be the hero of the story. Well, his reforms were slammed only last year by Warwick University, who did an investigation into them, who's still finding that victims of child sexual abuse and women being raped are still being treated like perpetrators. They're being dismissed. So do I have any faith in this? No. The other important thing the audience needs to know is that Labour only committed to implementing the CSA inquiry, the independent inquiry to child sexual abuse. They only committed to that this Sunday at 1 p.m. I mean, this is not a government that cares. They're only caring because Elon Musk and GB News have exposed and brought back this story. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about this. This is the reality. It's shocking. It's shocking stuff. So for them to be parading themselves around like they've done some good and to be criticizing everybody for jumping on a bandwagon is rich. Because if it wasn't for this so-called far-right bandwagon, we wouldn't be even voting on this at all. So we've got to put into perspective. Going back to your question, do you think Keir Starmer is going far enough, or does he care? No. Quite apparently, no.
Yeah, and speaking of the great work that GB News has been doing, and I think it's fair to say that Charlie Peters deserves a big pat on the back, if not a knighthood or something.
Yeah.
But let's have a look at, he's bothered to go and speak to the victims, unlike Jess Phillips. Let's have a look at the interview that he did earlier today in Rotherham.
Jack, your daughter was being abused by gangs and the police were doing nothing, but they did come for you. What happened when you tried to save her from an abuse den?
I was arrested outside, put in police car, taken away. We lived up next estate, so as we were passing, the stopped car told me that I would be arrested, to go in the house and don't go back. I was that mad and furious, I went back to the flat. Within a few minutes, police were back, but this time in a van, and it were only a few minutes. So there must have been some on the street waiting, because they must have known I was going back.
So they were watching this flat where your daughter was being abused. They weren't going in to save her, but they did go in to arrest you. Twice.
Yeah, they arrested me second time, took me down at the police station, kept me in there. About an hour and a half later, they come into, because they didn't put me in a cell, they put me in a room. They took me out of the room, took me out through the police station, into the front bit with public, go to report crimes. Took me outside and said, right, go home, because if you go back to that flat, we're going to arrest you for stalking. And I don't know if you know or not, but there's serious new stalking laws coming, and we'll arrest you for stalking the occupants of that house.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane that. I mean, it's just, to me, absolutely unthinkable to be in the position of a parent who knows that your own child is being abused. And, some of these girls were like locked in these houses for weeks on end, not even able to come home. And, knowing that your daughter is in there being, essentially tortured, and you try to save her and you get arrested. It's absolutely horrendous what these girls have gone through, and some of the situations the fathers were put in is just absolutely horrendous. Like, I heard a story of one guy, a father, the perpetrators, they would call him up and make him listen on loudspeaker to his own daughter being raped. I mean, it is just absolutely horrible. And to hear the police arrested him, we heard of stories, we've heard stories of girls, the police turning up after the neighbour heard screams, and the girls being arrested for being drunk and disorderly rather than the men that were raping them. I mean, it's just unthinkable. And from the sounds of what you're saying, Alex, we don't need to just talk in past tense on this. This stuff is still happening, maybe not to the same extent as it was now that things have been uncovered to a degree, but it's just absolutely horrifying. I mean, Connie, what do you think of what you saw there from that parent?
I mean, well, obviously it's horrific. And I wanted to come back to something about the survivors in particular, how Keir Starmer accusing Kemi Badenoch of jumping on the bandwagon because she's never met any of the victims. Why is it that you would have to meet the person in person to realise that these reports are bad enough to need a national inquiry? Keir Starmer's only met the victims today, or met some survivors today. I don't understand why it's this thing that if we're having these very credible reports, you can watch and hear and read what the survivors are saying. Unless Keir Starmer thinks that people like Charlie Peters are making these things up, what is this argument that, Kemi, you've never met any of the survivors, so who are you to raise concern? Like, maybe I'm getting have I misinterpreted what Keir Starmer's saying, that because she's never brought it up before, never met the survivors, that we shouldn't be making a fuss about it? Why would you need to meet someone in person to listen to those things and think, actually, we probably should do a governmental inquiry into this?
I mean, I haven't personally met the victims, but after I just saw, last year when I saw Charlie's documentary come out, after I saw that, I mean, I was just absolutely gobsmacked, and I was like, we need action on this. This is absolutely horrifying. I was so ashamed of my own country to see that this was happening, because, I'll be honest, I grew up in a bit of a bubble in that I grew up in Cornwall. We didn't really have any of the issues with multiculturalism there, to be honest. It's pretty much completely British there. We did not have issues with Pakistani kebab shops doing dodgy things with young girls. There were definitely rough areas and a lot of poverty in Cornwall, but we did not specifically have this issue, and I was always able to, from a very young age, just run around as a kid and feel completely safe. And I've always thought, aren't we lucky to grow up in Britain? But then to find out that girls in so many other parts of the country, and over 50, at least 50 towns and cities this has been happening in, have had to grow up in, such terrifying places where there are men out to get them, kidnap them and gang rape them, not just once, but often locking them in for weeks, and insisting that, if you do not come back, you don't come back to our flat and you let us do this to you on a regular basis, we'll burn your house down, we'll kill all of your family, the threats they endured. I just don't know how anyone could look at, even just one of those short clips from Charlie speaking to survivors, let alone the whole documentary, and not think this is something that needs drastic action. Yeah, it's pretty shameful to see Jess Phillips, the supposed feminist, not really interested. Anyway, let's just have a look, speaking of what the Labour politicians think, let's just have a look at this story that came out earlier on David Lammy, which I thought was interesting. So Lammy claims condemning ethnicity of grooming gangs panders to far right. So this came after previously when Sajid Javid welcomed the sentencing of 20 men for their horrific crimes. So if you look at the detail here, so he said... So Sajid Javid said, these sick Asian paedophiles are finally facing justice. I want to commend the bravery of the victims. And David Lammy said, where is his long quote? Here we go. Sajid Javid has brought a great office of state into disrepute. By singling out Asians, he not only panders to the far right, but increases the risk of violence and abuse against minorities across the country. And I feel like this is just... it goes into this whole narrative that if you dare single out someone for their heritage, that you're going to cause harm, you're going to cause racist attacks on these communities. So it's best that the public don't know the heritage and the background of people committing crimes. I mean, Alex, what do you think of this?
Well, I think it goes similarly to what Robert Jenrick said yesterday. We have failed to have honest conversations in this country for decades at the fear of being called racist, when actually they're just factual statements. In fact, that's the same kind of rhetoric Lammy's using that put off so many police officers and CPS lawyers from prosecuting in the first place. In fact, those were the things that Keir Starmer's reforms and report condemned. It's baffling the level of hypocrisy. We shouldn't be scared to call out ethnicities on one hand, Keir Starmer. On the other hand, if you do call out ethnicities, you're far right and a racist. It doesn't. I mean, please make it make sense, somebody, because until the day comes where British people can actually say what's on their mind in a way that is factual and fair, then we will never, ever recover as a country. We're never going to move forward. There is nobody above the law. There has been, but there shouldn't be any race, ethnicity, religion, whatever it is, above the law in this country. And that has been the case. We have set aside and made specific rules for people based on their ethnicity. It's basically discrimination. If I were to call the white people that raped girls in gangs white English grooming gangs, no one would call me racist. But if I said they're Asian, Pakistani rape gangs, I'm a racist. That, again, doesn't make sense. We have got to keep on speaking out. I think Robert Jenrick was absolutely right yesterday, and I'm glad he said the words that he won't allow his language to be censored. We need more of that. More of it's coming, and places like this on Reasoned, we're putting the finest foot forward.
Yeah, I just want to take a look. Sorry, Connie, did you want to say something there?
I was going to say, I can't remember the MP's name, but when Rupert Lowe stood up in Parliament today and read off his list of questions, her response to him, and her response was the same as David Lammy saying, we need to be careful about the language. Not only did she say you need to be careful about your language, she said, imagine the survivors hearing you say that. It's like how they are trying to twist, like it's constant gaslighting. Gaslighting to suggest that actually you're doing a disservice to the survivors by talking about it openly. You're doing a disservice to children by not voting against a national inquiry. Like I don't understand. I just don't. I don't understand how warped some people's moral is also just coming from a woman as well. I find it so upsetting because as women, you know what it's like to have to actually describe why things like sexual assault is so bad, to get someone to understand who hasn't experienced it, or for a man to experience it from a female perspective. You have to describe things in how it actually happened. I know I'm just repeating what you've just said, Alex, but again, I don't understand how the Labour Party can say that they want to tackle abuse against children without actually talking about. She said the words that you've used are disgusting. The words that he's used are describing what's actually happened, yet she's more disgusted by his words than what has actually happened.
Exactly, Connie.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's gone and read any of those court documents and whatnot, it's difficult to read. It's disgusting to read. Some of the stuff is absolutely horrifying. But if you choose to be a politician, you've got to deal with some scary shit. You've got to face the music, and you've got to be able to call a spade and say what it is. And I think for me, what's quite concerning is when politicians feel that they should hide information from us for our own good. So we've seen, this worry about community tensions being brought up in the case of the grooming gangs, saying, we shouldn't tell the public because, it might cause people to become more racist. We should hide the fact that this is men of typically Pakistani heritage that are committing these crimes. But it's not just that. We saw it with the whole, Southport stabbing situation. Clearly information being hidden from us. Then when we found out, new information about, the supposed attacker having an Al-Qaeda manual and, stuff to make a chemical weapon, they delayed releasing that information from us because they were worried that it might cause riots. They held it from the public for some time because they didn't want to cause an uproar. And I think there's something, it sets quite a scary precedent. But just last couple of things on the grooming gangs. I know we stayed on this for a while, but I think it's an important topic for us to talk about, is Nigel Farage coming out and saying that if the Labour Party do not launch an inquiry, that he'll do it himself.
Talk grooming gangs, and let's have a look. When Keir Starmer was asked whether we needed to have a full national inquiry, let's see what Keir Starmer had to say.
It is something about the nature of our politics, because once we lose the anchor that truth matters, in the robust debate we must have, then we're on a very slippery slope. And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth, and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. It's all the far right. Wanting to know the truth means you're part of the far right. Now, tomorrow, Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, she'll be asking in the House of Commons, she'll be putting an amendment down, effectively saying there needs to be a full public inquiry. Her difficulty, of course, is that the Conservative government, when they were faced with this, didn't have an inquiry. There was one, but it was a whitewash, frankly, because it only looked at what had happened in 6 towns and cities as opposed to the 50 that we know about now. And grooming was just but a part of it. What we need here is an inquiry that is not a shotgun that deals with all of the problems that young people can face, and that can be through the church or elsewhere. We know about these things. We need a rifle that deals with what I believe was outright racist behaviour against young white girls who some, mercifully few, but some in the Pakistani community simply thought were trash. I have said that if the government don't give us a full review, that I will raise the money and put the money towards an independent inquiry, and I mean it. It was also very interesting that the Times leader today said, look, there has to be, the public demands that we get the full truth, because it feels like through the police, through social services, through political parties, we've not been told the truth for fear it might stoke racist division, the irony being that the crimes themselves were very racist in intent.
So there we go. Oh God, that's not the right one. That's what happens when you let Chloe run the stream rather than Darren. It all goes chaotic. But I think the question that I want to ask here is whether you guys think that an inquiry funded by Farage is a good idea. Wait, hang on. Can you guys speak? I don't know if I can hear. Okay,
yeah.
The sound disappeared for a second there. Because on the one hand, this would mean we get an inquiry of sorts rather than nothing. Great. But on the other hand, it might play into this narrative that has caused this narrative to get pushed under, has caused this topic to go under the carpet again and again, that this is some sort of far-right issue if it becomes associated with the Reform Party. You also have the problem that it will not have the statutory powers to force people to turn up and speak. Some people might just not want to turn up if they feel like it's going to, you know, destroy their reputation and end up with them being held accountable for doing horrendous things. I mean, Farage sort of said on LBC, oh, I don't think that will be a problem because it will be pretty embarrassing for them if they don't turn up. But potentially they won't be able to bring to the table all the people that need to be held to account. But on the other hand, it could be the case that if we have an inquiry launched by the government, although they will call it an independent inquiry and say they've appointed independent people to run the show, it might be the case that they try to use their influence to make sure that the Labour Party's reputation is not too badly damaged. You know, there are a lot of Labour councillors, for example, that are wrapped up in this scandal. It could potentially be quite damaging. Obviously, there are questions about Keir Starmer's role at the CPS. So, Connie, what do you think? Do you think it would be a good idea to have an inquiry from Farage or not?
I think I agree with the concerns that you were outlining, that ultimately at the end of the day, he won't be able to force people to come and see him, or not him, but come and see the inquiry that Reform would put on. But I do also agree that if he ends up doing it, that people who are pushing this idea that it is a far right thing to be concerned about won't believe some of the things that will be found. Like, we already know how bad, we know to a certain extent how bad it is. Imagine how bad it is going to be when we find out what actually is going on when we have an inquiry. I feel like some people are going to say that it was made up if Reform was to do the inquiry, because some people are that keen to use this as a political football. So I also think we shouldn't lose hope yet. I am pretty convinced that this Labour government will have to do a national inquiry at some point. I mean, the fact like you were saying earlier, we've already seen, was it Jess Phillips saying, well, if that's what the survivors want, even though she knows that's what they want.
Yeah, there was a small change in tone, which I don't think everyone picked up on, which was quite important. You do make the good point about the concern about this becoming political football. I think, you know, I've noticed, for example, you know, Charlie Peters pointing out a couple of times in the past couple of days, you know, we need to bring this back to the victims because this has turned a lot into political gossip. If it is the case that the Reform Party, the ones launching an inquiry, it might be seen as sort of politically motivated. We also saw Alex, I don't know if you saw what the Conservatives put out. They put out like a petition thing, but it wasn't an official government petition. In fact, actually, I do have it here. So they put this up saying, Keir Starmer doesn't think victims of rape gangs deserve answers. We do. So quite damning of Keir Starmer there, talking about his point about the far right. It feels a little bit bitchy. Charlie shared it and said, you know, strident attack line from the Conservatives. And you go to the site and you can sign this petition, But it's not one of the proper government petitions that you sign on the petitions site. And then after you sign it, it comes up saying, do you want to donate money to help us do this, to help us try and get an inquiry? But it's not clear, is that a pot of money that's just for like the inquiry, or is that going into the Tory coffers? And then it says after that, also, do you want to join the Conservative Party? Join us now. It felt a little bit, I don't think, like it might be politically motivated, and it's just they're trying to use it for political gain. Especially, a lot of people are pointing out the fact that Kemi Badenoch has mentioned grooming gangs in the House of Commons today for the first time ever, I believe, despite her being, in a position where she was meant to be protecting women and girls in the past. Are they jumping on not a far-right bandwagon, but a bandwagon when it suits them politically?
I mean, so the first thing to point out is that the actual ad they've put out for that, I don't know if you can bring it back up, actually, it might be helpful for the audience to see it. But that actual ad that the Tories have taken out there is in response to one they did exactly the same the Labour Party did on Rishi Sunak. So Labour actually put out the exact same format, so the exact same colours, exact same format, and took one out against Rishi Sunak, claiming that he hadn't done enough for child victims. So that's probably the first thing to point out. They were trying to be almost funny, I guess. I don't know whether they were trying to have some sort of irony, like, oh, we're going to do the same thing you did to us, political football. Then you go onto the page. It's, sign this petition. And Tory petitions never go anywhere. Like, there's no way to track them. You're giving your data to the Conservative Party. That's what you're doing. It is shameless what they've done here.
Well, that's
Absolutely
what I felt like,
shameless.
and I did sign that earlier. I wanted to see what comes on the next page. Did notice that there was no. I didn't really. I felt like I'd sort of been scammed in that there was no ticker saying this many people out of 100,000 have signed the petition, and it almost tricked you into thinking it's one of those proper government petitions.
I signed it as well, Chloe.
Yeah,
but
the next page was just like, give us your money, and I was like,
I know. Well, that's the thing. When I first saw it, I have been like, when I talk about what peaks me of gender, it was tickle versus giggle. I have never been as angry as I am about this since then, and I feel like I've peaked for a second time. But yeah, I was so angry. I went through it and signed it. I didn't see the thing about the money, but I did see the joiner Conservatives, and I thought, oh.
Yeah, it asked for money, but it was not clear where they were going to spend the money that you donate. So donate money to Conservatives to help us try and get an inquiry. And it's like, how are you spending that money? It does not really
I don't think there's any harm in signing the petition.
Yeah,
but I think it's embarrassing for them how they're doing it.
Yeah, so I think
they're weaponizing one of the biggest shames on our country to get your money and to get your data. That is what's happening with that. And as much as I think the attack ad itself is clever to play on what Labour Party did before, the timing is off. The timing is off. Again, we're making this about all the wrong things. It's tit for tat, Tory versus Labour, rather than actually, do you know what? As the Conservatives, why don't we put out a statement from a victim? Why don't we? Why doesn't Kemi Badenoch sit down?
But she did do that as well. She did do that as well, Alex. She did put a video out, clipped up with some of Charlie's clips as well. It was actually really good on Kemi's
That is good to hear.
account.
But this actual, this campaign they've put up, I'm sorry, but that is completely wrong.
Actually,
whether it's right, to
I
do
didn't
it.
ever see this thing here with Keir's face on it. I signed the petition as a result of seeing that video that Kemi posted, because she put the link with that video.
It's this one, basically.
Into the rape gang scandal. Many people across the country agree.
Many campaigners and survivors have told GB News that the ICSA report was a sham. It only looked at a handful of locations. There are 49, at least, other towns and cities that they say need serious investigation.
Over the course of many years, thousands of young British girls were systematically raped and abused by gangs in towns and cities across the UK.
Plucked off street corners, thrown into taxis, taken into kebab shops, plied with alcohol, plied with drugs, and raped, exploited, murdered. and victimised by these gangs.
And in some cases, it appears police, politicians, and local officials colluded to keep this scandal under wraps.
Abuse had gone on for decades, and nobody responsible had been punished. The police and council had turned a blind eye to the abuse, or even blamed the raped girls.
The public demand answers. The victims deserve justice. But Keir Starmer and the Labour government are trying to sweep it under the rug. Keir Starmer thinks that calling for a national inquiry makes you part of a far-right bandwagon.
Calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right.
So, if the government won't hold an inquiry, we will force a vote in Parliament. But we need your help to keep this cause in the spotlight. We need to send the government a message they cannot ignore. So please go to demandananinquirynow.com, sign our petition, and let's get the victims of this scandal the justice they deserve.
Okay. So
that was better.
Hang on one second. Sorry,
yeah,
because sorry, that's not what I thought it was. That is just an ad. That's just a bunch of clips thrown together. Any politician can do that in their back room. It is not the same as Kemi Badenoch going to meet a victim, putting that victim, that victim's story out. That is Kemi Badenoch doing an attack ad that has been cleverly edited and scripted by her team. Sorry, that is ridiculous. I mean, look, I don't mind politicians doing things like that, but let's not misrepresent what that was. That wasn't Kemi Badenoch. I'm sitting here with a victim. I don't want to make this political, but I want you to all hear that victim's story. This is just
But do you not think, Alex, if she had just gone out to meet a victim like Keir Starmer has today, that would also be like, well, you're only meeting a victim.
Sure. I completely agree. I think I completely agree with that. What I mean is that the timing of doing all these things is off. I mean, first of all, that's why everyone's so up in arms about both parties for failing to do something about this for so long. Whatever they do now, they're both going to get criticised for it because they've both done nothing, essentially. But I would still rather the victim's story be heard than seeing a political advertisement for joining my petition, which is basically a link to sign up to donate to the Conservative Party. I think that's shameless. If from my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good for her to go and speak out to actual victims. I mean, I think that advert was better than the other thing that we showed you, which seemed a lot more bitchy, in that she was focusing on the victims. But yeah, it's the politics of it all has all gotten a bit messy, and we're often too busy talking about, is this going to benefit Labour or is this going to benefit the Conservatives, rather than the actual question, which is, are the victims going to get justice? Okay, just before we move on to Sadiq Khan, let's just, because we haven't been looking at enough comments, let's just have a look at what some of the viewers have to say. Richard says the Labour Party are monsters. Flo says Sadiq and Jess should be sharing a cell. Jess Phillips looked, if any of you watched PMQs earlier, she looked absolutely fuming on the front bench. I could not hear what she was saying, but I could hear her see her sort of mouthing and getting very angry and shouty on that front bench. She did not look in a good mood. Dave says, I can't believe children's interests do not come first and foremost. What the hell is going on now in the UK? Absolutely, I couldn't agree with that more. Save says, Starmer will dig his heels in and there will be an uprising. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens after this, because there's clearly quite a huge disparity between what the public want to see and what politicians want to see. The politicians are standing there saying the ICSA report, it was perfect, we don't need to do anything else. But it seems like the victims and the public are sending a very, very different message, and they, after that vote today, they might feel hopeless and feel like there's nothing else that they can do to be listened to. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Will we see protests? Maybe we will. Let's see what happens after this. I hope that the focus stays on the issue, and it's not the case that after this vote we all just go, right, forget about that story now, move along. Hopefully we can keep it in the limelight enough until we finally, might force Keir Starmer into a U-turn on this and get him to do an inquiry. Julie says Starmer has sacrificed our kids to save and cover his corrupt arse. Not holding back there, Julie. Darren is watching. He says, "Dream team." Thank you for watching, Darren. We appreciate it.
Well, he's not doing anything else.
He's sat in bed with his lemsip watching us.
Sat in bed with a lemsip, Darren.
Beazle reminds us grooming is happening now. I think it's very, very important. I said it before, I'll say it again. We cannot just talk on the past tense on this. Paul, very dedicated subscriber of ours. You can see his little gold badge there. They're all scared of being accused of being racist, thus losing votes. Exactly. Well, the problem, they're acting as though we've solved the problems of that were around this scandal, which is that people were not doing the right thing because they were scared of being called racist. But it's quite ironic, given that still today it seems like, or at least in my eyes, the reason why we are not getting an inquiry is because they're scared of being called racist.
Can I just say something on here about Jess
Connie.
Phillips and being called racist? Is that when, I think it was in 2019, when there were protests outside a school in Birmingham, when specifically Muslim parents didn't want their children to be taught about same-sex relationships and PSHE lessons. And Jess Phillips called those parents bigoted. And she said, people are anxious about standing up to religious communities, but there's right and wrong here, and those views are bigoted. So it's like she was happy to call out Islamic cultural views, perhaps, you may say, about views on same-sex marriage. But when it comes to minorities like Pakistani men who are mostly Muslim, she can't call it out when it comes to gang rape. Like, I don't understand. And that's why, to me, it is so obvious about these votes, considering the reaction she got when she took to her victory speech.
Yep,
or
well, that's what I was just
her victory speech of 600 votes.
She nearly lost her seat, right? She's probably actually worried about losing her seat because she nearly lost it to a pro-Gaza independent. I think she's got a quite significant Muslim population in her seat. It was pointed out by Kemi Badenoch today that the definition of Islamophobia that is being used by this government is from an organisation that claimed that talking about the grooming gangs was Islamophobic. Right? There are going to, whether we like it or not, by talking. Any politician that talks about this issue is going to get accusations of Islamophobia if they point out the fact that it was Pakistani Muslim men predominantly being the perpetrators. So it puts Jess Phillips and a lot in the Labour Party that relies on the Muslim vote, it puts them in a very difficult position. Alex, go on.
Well, I wanted to ask you both, from a female's perspective, I supported Jess Phillips when she came out on the podium and said, I'm being harassed by these men. And I thought it's a disgraceful thing to do. It was very un-British. It's not how we deal with our democracy here. Do you think that she will get sympathy from people now, given that she's, used very inflammatory language herself about George Galloway in the past? She called him a rape apologist, of course. And then she went on BBC and said, Elon Musk called me a rape apologist. It's really hurting me in my life. She's failed to call the Oldham victims before she's done a BBC News interview. Do you think that you will have the same sympathy for her, if you may have had any at all, in the election?
Connie?
Sorry, Alex. Clarify that question again.
So I guess just to clarify, given Jess Phillips's sort of record and is being quite exposed now, would you have sympathy for her, given the fact that during the election she was heckled, by the pro-Gaza lobby?
Would you have? I absolutely had. I had sympathy for her when that happened. It was horrific. What was so annoying is that when she was interviewed about it, she didn't say anything about who the men were and what they were saying. And I think this is why I've gotten quite a lot of hate from feminists on Twitter at the moment, who I think would normally agree with me on things when it comes to sex-based rights. But women are so scared to say that actually, yes, in general, it is a male problem, but in this case, it's a specifically male problem, men from certain backgrounds, Pakistani Muslim backgrounds. I don't understand how these women aren't under any illusion that Islam is anti-women's rights. But for some reason, there's this idea that it's this liberal feminist idea that I think that if we start to criticize Islam, if it's men, you're sort of indirectly criticizing Islamic women. for example, women who might choose to wear the burqa, and that is seen as a very, in some people see that as being inherently anti-feminist, to say that some women shouldn't go along with Islamic practices. And I think that is why, because in a roundabout way, she is not just concerned about the backlash that you are going to get when you criticize Islam. We all know what happens when you do that, but also because I think that she is worried about being seen as a feminist that isn't for all women.
Yeah.
Which includes Islamic
She's a
women.
feminist. She's shown herself to be a feminist when it suits her. And I think that it was a bit rich of Jess Phillips today to, rather than make her argument when she was, had Elon Musk come after her, rather than make her argument as to why Elon Musk is wrong to want a public inquiry, and, she can make her argument as to why exactly she thinks the best thing to do is to just implement the recommendations of the ICSA report, which haven't fully been implemented yet. Rather than actually make a proper argument, she sits there and plays the victim and talks about how, I've got a higher security threat to me now because Elon is bullying me. And I'm like, okay, being an MP, people are going to hate you. You're going to have security measures in place. Okay, you've got to be able to deal with the heat. I'm sorry, but suck it up. And I think to sit there and complain about how unsafe you are when you are not doing what it takes to protect young girls who have lived incredibly unsafe lives and are living very unsafe lives because they are being groomed and gang raped, yet you're sitting there saying, I'm really worried because Elon said something mean about me on Twitter. I'm worried people are going to come after me. I'm sorry, Jess, but suck it up, okay? The girls that we are talking about in this scandal have been through a heck of a lot worse than you have.
I saw someone say, sorry, Alex.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I saw someone say today on X, I just love Jess Phillips more and more, seeing her turn up to Parliament today after everything she's been through.
It's shocking, isn't it? It's just so disgraceful, and I think this kind of I feel very very angry about the whole thing because it has been made into such a, I've done this, you didn't do that, I did this while I was in government, when actually the reality is none of them did enough. None of them have done enough to hold people accountable. None of them have done enough to give victims some form of justice. And none of them have done enough to stop this from carrying on today. So they should all be hanging their heads in shame as they walk through those doors and thinking, what can we do together? This shouldn't be a party issue, but it is. And politicians are making it about themselves in some way. I mean, Keir Starmer today made multiple attempts to make it all about him and his track record, which, by the way, is abysmal. Absolutely abysmal, his track record as DPP at the CPS.
Remember when we all thought that it, well, not all of us, but when people used to say, isn't it so great, a human rights law is the Prime Minister? But it's so great, like he's got all this experience, he knows what's right and wrong.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that you have to ask yourself the question, and he was asked about the Mohammed Al-Fayed case today. I can't remember which MP it was off the top of my head now, but a Tory MP asked him about why didn't you prosecute Mohammed Al-Fayed? And Keir Starmer's response, and this is all he said, was he stood up and said, the case didn't cross my desk, and then sat down again. Those were his words. And I was gobsmacked hearing that. I was gobsmacked. Nothing more to say, going, this is absolute tragic what happened. We should be looking more into it. Nope. Didn't cross my desk, not my problem. Don't care.
I do not buy that. That did not cross my desk.
Don't buy it.
And it's quite close to home for you, isn't it, Alex? Because your mum had
yes,
an
my mum was a victim of Mohammed Al-Fayed, and for politicians to be so brazen about their failure, put it this way: I spent a long time in business, right? I've spent 12 years in business now. If I oversaw my team covering up something so high profile like that, I would be to blame for it. I would be roped in front of the board, and they'd say, how did you let this happen under your watch? This is your team, this is your department, and you have failed to hold your people accountable. I couldn't just say to them, sorry guys, didn't cross my desk. They'd go, what do you mean? You're negligent. You're ineffective. You are a poor leader. And now that man is prime minister. The person who is now shrugging his shoulders didn't cross my desk. Jimmy Savile didn't cross my desk.
Jimmy Savile.
Oh, those the 2 years, the post office scandal. Oh, didn't cross my desk. Oh, the 2 years those grooming gang victims before that didn't cross my desk.
It's like, what were you doing? Just sipping tea in the staff room the whole time? I mean, maybe.
I'm not buying it, Chloe. I don't buy it for a second. I don't buy it for a second.
Let's move on, because we're already at 9:03, and Alex and I have both got to be up early tomorrow, and we don't want to keep our viewers too long. So just very quickly, a couple of other stories. So we've spoken about this previously on the podcast, but we've now found out that the ads, which you may have seen, Join the Money Revolution, with an Islamic preacher burning US dollars, has now been banned and by the Advertising Standards Authority as causing a serious offence. I think my understanding from the article here is that it was, in part due to the fact that they're burning up US dollars, and that could be seen as offensive to Americans. But, just to put this into context, Keir Starmer was very happy for this advert to go up with an Islamic preacher. What did I say? Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer.
We've been talking about him so long. They lives in my head rent free, clearly. Sadiq Khan was happy for this to go up with this Islamic preacher who apparently has some quite backwards views, but at the same time banned an advert from the farmers, from the National Farmers Union, about the tax on farmers. That apparently wasn't cool with him, but this was, and my understanding is that it was GB News' work and them pushing for the Advertising Standards Authority to take action on this that has led to this. So GB News doing fantastic work at the moment, clearly, with this, and the grooming gangs making some real change. And we've just found out that they've beaten Sky News for the second month in a row. But Alex, what do you think of this? How will it affect Sadiq Khan?
Do you know what's so funny about this, Chloe, is that when this was brought to his attention in City Hall, he said, actually, it's not my job to look into this. We have a special committee that deals with all this stuff. I can't remember what the words he used, but basically he shrugged his shoulders. But he's able to intervene when it comes to the farmer stuff. Yeah. Absolutely hilarious, because it's so exposing. It's so exposing because he didn't want to remove this ad for obvious reasons, because he's a bigot, and in my opinion. And frankly, I think, Sadiq Khan has double standards on almost everything. And it seems to be, actually, correct me if you think I'm wrong, Chloe, it seems to me that the entire Labour Party has this prolific double standards problem, actually.
Connie, do you think Sadiq Khan deserves his knighthood that he's going to be getting?
No, I don't, because of the rate at which crime is going up. I mean, obviously, even, was it 2 days ago now, that poor 14-year-old boy who was stabbed to death on a bus on his way home from school.
Oh, but Connie, he's rebranded the Overground, though. We've got the
But this is,
Isn't that a huge achievement?
Yeah, I'm a bit confused by this story, to be honest, because I think, as much as I do not enjoy the promotion of any Islam, to be honest, at all, I think it is... We can't ban adverts just when it is things that we don't like, whereas Sadiq Khan has banned other adverts that... for example, like you said, the farmers, I can't remember what it was, it escapes me now, but there have been other adverts that have been taken down, which has been very controversial, and I think that we need to be careful about double standards.
I'll tell you the ads, Connie. There was one that was supposedly body shaming. There was another one for a comedian about fast food that had a picture of a burger in it, I think it was, something like that, or a hot dog. There's been a few examples. There was a Christian ad, was there as well? One for Bible, I think at some point he took down. Could be wrong on that one, but I think there was a while ago. So there's been quite a few.
Okay, let's move on to the last thing. So we've got Meta are changing hate speech rules. So you may have seen, I won't show you the whole video, but Mark Zuckerberg, he came out, made an announcement yesterday saying that we're going to end censorship on Meta platforms, i.e. Facebook and Instagram. He explained how the algorithm works in that they were, there is genuinely harmful content out there, things that are, genuinely inciting violence, stuff that's very inappropriate for children to see and whatnot, and that they had put certain algorithms in place to take down that content, but that the algorithms were too sensitive. We also had, I think earlier this year, 2024, I guess that's last year now, them put in place this setting to limit political content because apparently people were finding it distressing. That was extremely frustrating for me and for anyone who makes political content, because we just got, put right up to the back of the algorithm. They are getting rid of that. And, he also, I think he showed a lot of humility, to be honest, by putting his hands up and saying, look, there was too much censorship. We gave in to pressure from the Democrat administration, especially in times during COVID, to censor information, but that is all ending now and we're going back to our roots and bringing free speech back. Connie, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that Mark Zuckerberg did this genuinely because he had a change of heart about free speech, or do you think that he's doing it because he's scared that X is becoming more popular than Facebook and Instagram?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely the latter. I mean, I think it's great, but definitely the latter. I wondered what you guys think about Owen Jones's theory that he's worried about Trump's previous threat. Have you heard that in his book he wrote how I think he was threatening to imprison or go after Mark Zuckerberg if he continued to go after pro-Trump.
We're sending him to jail. Okay.
Yeah.
I love your.
But yeah, that's what Owen Jones's theory was on Sky when he was debating Baroness Claire Fox about this. But I mean, to me, it just seemed like people who aren't in favour of this are, I love Owen Jones. Who aren't in favour of this is, they don't like free speech when it comes to the left wing views their dominance being threatened. I mean, it is so typical of Owen Jones, but I am interested to know what that. I mean, yeah, it is very suspicious timing, isn't it? Only so many days until Trump is inaugurated. So we'll see.
Well, it's perfect timing because the election only got ratified yesterday by Congress, which is the same time that Mark Zuckerberg released that video the day the election was ratified, which I think is very suspicious timing, if you ask me. But the man is doing this when it's politically expedient to do so, not being a trailblazer. Elon Musk did it during a period of time when it was not popular to do this, where actually there were people who were trying to lock him up and throw away the key to do that. And that's commendable. What Mark Zuckerberg is doing is changing tact with the times, not actually, saying, no, I believe in free speech and this is how things should be. He's following lead. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's trying to be a chameleon, and he's obviously going to be heralded, and I welcome the changes, but I don't trust him. He obviously hasn't got a moral bone in his body, otherwise he would have done this from the get-go. To have this revelation right after Trump's elected is rich. And let's be honest, if Kamala had won, that announcement never would have been made. It definitely would never have been made. He even says it in his statement that he's following the tide of Trump becoming president. So, it's so calculated. It's so transparent. He's even sacked poor old Nick Clegg. Not that I have any sympathy for him, because, he wanted to attack the European Union. Apparently, Nick Clegg wouldn't allow the European Union to be attacked under his watch. So he's gone as well.
Oh, dear.
But there we go.
I think I'm kind of on the fence as to whether this is genuine or not. I think that what Mark Zuckerberg did, I think that he showed a lot of humility by putting his hands up and saying, yes, we messed up. We genuinely, we're making an effort to remove content that's harmful. I think he put his hands up and said, the government told us that there are significant concerns with false information being put out during times such as COVID, which, I think most people, at least in the beginning, went along with lockdown for at least the first few weeks, even if they then changed their mind later. I think he may have had some sort of change of heart, but also. But also it might be partly calculated. But I think one thing to also note is, so he has now got Dana White, the guy in charge of UFC, on his team. So Mark Zuckerberg, if anyone's been following him over the past few years, he's been, in his free time, he's been really getting into his fitness, into his running, and getting into MMA. And so then he's been getting into MMA, going along to these MMA fights. He's then ended up friends with Dana White, and maybe Dana White has been mates with him, chatted to him, brought him round to the free speech arguments, and he's actually changed his mind a bit.
I don't buy it at all. I mean, this is a guy that censored thousands, maybe millions of people during COVID. This is the guy that colluded with the FBI to cover up the Hunter Biden story during an election. He is not to be trusted. He is trying to be a chameleon. He's gone through this massive PR rebrand in the last year, anticipating the change in the election. And it's you guys have got to see through it for what it is. He is just trying to get with the times. If Kamala Harris had won, this never would have happened. I can promise you that. If I could have some alternate time, though, I could see that happening. Mark Zuckerberg definitely would not have been on my screen yesterday. I'm very honest. I'm very.
It seems like you've got a fair number of people agreeing with you in the comments. Ringo says only reason he never got into trouble was because he was a government asset. That's changed now, and he knows he'll be screwed in court. Quite a lot of people in the comments. I won't go through all of them because we all want to get off to bed. But thank you everybody for all your amazing comments and for tuning in. It's good to be back. We will be back again next week, Wednesday at 8 p.m. And fingers crossed, Darren will be alive by then. So don't worry, Darren's not dead. There's been a lot of speculation given that he wasn't on the Saturday 5 on Saturday. Poor Alex had to take the reins. Darren is here. He's alive, and he will be back on the Saturday 5 on Saturday, I presume, and he will be back here on Wednesday next week. Alex, presumably you'll be on the Saturday 5 on Saturday.
No, I'm not.
No?
I'm not.
Oh.
I'm hosting Ben Leo's show, so I can't. I unfortunately will not be on the Saturday 5 this weekend.
Well, there's lots of viewers to tune into, because you've got from 6 to 8, you'll have Darren. And then from 8 till 9, they are replaying the brilliant Grooming Gangs documentary that GB News made. Please do watch that if you have not already. And then from 9 to 11, you've got Alex. So there we go.
It's a reason special.
There we go. And Connie, thank you very much for joining us for the first time. I'm sure all your viewers loved you. We absolutely loved you. Well, I did at least. I presume Alex did. Speaking for him.
Of course. Brilliant.
We had Darren commenting, saying how fabulous you were as well.
Did a great job today.
Thank you, all our viewers, for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.